Welcome to ACAP Guilford's monthly meeting. We are so glad to have you join us. Are you familiar with ACAP? Let me just tell you a little bit about it. ACAP Community is an educational 501c3 nonprofit organization that offers information, resources, support, and community for those of us who are caring for our aging parents. As you can tell from our name, our focus is on supporting adults as they care for their parents. However, all care providers are welcome, whether you're an adult child, another relative, a friend, or a professional. As you can tell from our name, our focus is on supporting, each of our 9 ACAP chapters located across the Eastern Seaboard offers monthly programs that address issues related to aging, family dynamics, and adult-child caregiving. Presenters are experts on the topics they speak about, and many are or have been caregivers for their own parents or in-laws. ACAP Guilford meets on the third Thursday of each month. Our meetings begin with a light lunch and time to talk to each other. We begin at 11:30 for lunch, and then we go on to our program at noon. We'll provide lunch, but do RSVP if you'd like to be here in person so we have enough food ready for you. Our meetings take place at Senior Resources of Guilford at 1401 Benjamin Parkway in Greensboro. And if you are not able one month to be with us, feel free to watch the recording of this program on our YouTube channel. We'd like to thank today's sponsor, the Age Coach. The Age Coach, Dr. Cheryl Greenberg, provides support for seniors and their families as they experience life changes. Clients who are dealing with health issues, including dementia, learn about symptoms and changes, develop strategies for caregiving, and address the feelings that arise with these illnesses. Through open and confidential conversations, seniors and their families gather information and become more comfortable in addressing these illnesses. Seniors who are reaching for new roles and adventures, such as retiring or finding new activities or moving to new homes, explore possibilities and plan paths for the future. Thank you to the Age Coach for its ongoing support of our chapter. And now let's turn to our program. We would like to hear from you, so if you're in the room and you have a question, just raise your hand. If you're watching virtually, put your question into the chat box. Today, our program is responding to challenging behaviors of Alzheimer's and other dementias. You know, dementia is a general term for a number of different diseases that can damage the brain, which in turn affects an individual's memory, thinking, communication, and even the way they function in their everyday lives. Some people act in ways that are unusual or problematic. Their children and other care providers are often confused and uncertain about how to respond. So today we are very fortunate to have Alexandra Buechner speak with us about how to understand these new behaviors and suggest ways that caregivers can be supportive. Alexandra is a program manager with the Alzheimer's Association Western Carolina chapter. She recently graduated from Winthrop University with a master's in social work, and she lives in Kannapolis with her husband, dog, and cat. Ms. Buechner, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for that introduction. Again, my name is Alexandra Buechner, and I am fortunate to work for the Alzheimer's Association, which is another local nonprofit. Now, when I graduated with my master's in social work, never did I think that community education would fill my cup the way that it has these past 2 years. So before I get started today, I just want to share my appreciation to each of you for spending your afternoon here with us today. We've got a lot of exciting content to cover, a lot of incredible information to share. In this program, we're going to work on how to apply the approaches that we're going to cover to real life scenarios as well. So feel free to raise your hand as we move through today's presentation. If you have a question or if you're taking notes and want to ask after, that is absolutely fine as well. Before I dive into the content, can I get a thumbs up if everyone can hear me okay at this volume? You feel good about that? Perfect. All right. So as you'll see here, this program is part of a larger series that the Alzheimer's Association recently put out in early March. So this is the fourth of the 5-part series, but the beautiful thing about this series is that we can present these independently or as part of the overall series. So we're going to talk about responding to dementia-related behaviors and what that looks like as an individual progresses through the stages of the disease itself. So let's start first with our learning objectives, so we all know what we're going to be talking about today. As you'll see up here, we're going to describe how dementia changes in individuals' behavior. We're also going to talk about possible triggers for those dementia-related behaviors. Additionally, we're going to compare those non-medical versus medical ways to approach the behavior. And we're also going to go over that 4-step approach for how to approach these behaviors. Obviously, I know that this information can be utilized in many different ways when it comes to behaviors. Sometimes it takes us getting a little creative to figure out what's going on behind the scenes with this behavior. So we're going to explore that together on ways that we can think differently about dementia behavior. But let's start from the very beginning with understanding those behavior changes. So really, what is dementia-related behavior? Dementia-related behaviors is another way that an individual communicates with people and the world around them. A dementia-related behavior is like an alarm telling you that there's an unmet need somewhere under the surface. And that becomes our job to figure out what that unmet need is. Now, you might feel as though the person you're caring for or working with has good days and bad days, but just know that that is never intentional. Again, this is a form of communication to let you know that something is off, something is wrong. Whether it's an emotional need, a physical need, an environmental change that needs to take place. So we're going to dig into those possible triggers and types of alarm systems that could go off for an individual. So what ultimately is causing these changes? We know that Alzheimer's disease and all other dementia are a progressive disease. Therefore, it starts to get worse as time goes on. These changes in the brain make it more difficult for individuals that are living with the disease to understand the world around them and make sense of changes that are occurring in their world as well. We're going to hear this quick video.
The changes in the brain that occur with Alzheimer's and other dementias then can impact on somebody's cognition, their functioning, and also their behaviour. Now, these changes aren't consistent over time, but they can vary. They can vary day by day, and then they can also vary as the disease progresses.
Individuals living with dementia can have trouble understanding the world around them. And unfortunately, that could lead to them not knowing what's real, what's safe, or what's appropriate. That uncertainty then sometimes leads to dementia-related behaviors.
All right, sorry about the volume on that. We'll work on that as we move through today's program. All right, so let's talk about how behaviors are a form of communication and what that may look like. So ultimately, we know that any behaviors, even ones that we show, are a form of communication. And it could be a response to so many different moving facets of our lives as well. People living with dementia react to what they think, feel, or need from the people in the world around them, and that ultimately is a form of communication. Keep in mind that behaviors make perfect sense to the person that's living with dementia. It's important to understand that the behavior is not related to the individual's true feelings, but them trying to make sense of the world around them. Now, some common dementia-related behaviors, some of which we're going to touch on a little bit deeper here today, are what you see on the screen. Anxiety and agitation, aggression and anger, suspicions, delusions, getting lost or wandering. These are all behaviors that you may come across as you're caring for somebody living with the disease. And oftentimes, there's no warning signs for when these behaviors will take place. To people that are not living with the disease, it may seem as though the behavior comes out of nowhere. So we kind of have to put on our detective cap to join the reality and better understand what that individual is feeling.
My mother did experience some degree of suspicion. And this is a rather long and involved story, but my name is Freddie James. My father's name was Fred James. And shortly after he died, my mother accused me actually of stealing some money, of going to the bank and actually using my father's name and my name, the similarity, to take some money, which absolutely had not happened, but this suspicion had developed in her mind. It took a lot of patience. It took a lot of explaining, but eventually it just took letting the situation die down, not getting too involved in it myself. In other words, not reacting in anger, not reacting with a lot of emotion, but just allowing her to work through the process.
All right, we're gonna take a brief pause here for a knowledge check on this next screen. So what do we think for this, true or false? Wandering only happens in the early stages of the disease. False, exactly. So it's estimated that roughly 60% of people will wander at some point throughout the course of the disease. And as I said just a minute ago, there's not going to be one warning sign. There might be a warning sign where somebody is beginning to pace around the house or something along those lines. But a lot of times, caregivers are caught by surprise if their loved one does wander. This doesn't happen in any one specific stage of this disease because truthfully, when we talk about the stages, that doesn't mean I can put somebody in a neat little box and say, this is mild stage, because that's not how this disease works, right? Individuals ebb and flow through those stages, which then you might see new behaviors that you've never seen before. So on our next module, we're going to talk about those triggers for dementia-related behaviors. Now again, along your personal caregiving journey or within your profession, you might not come across all of these, or maybe you have multiple times, but we're going to dig in a little bit deeper to those triggers and what they look like. Now you'll see on this slide that up on the top we have external triggers and internal triggers. External triggers are defined as those that are happening around or in the world around the person living with dementia. Internal triggers come from within the individual based on their feelings, their thoughts, their preferences. So physical triggers come from pain, discomfort, or unmet needs. That could be as simple as the room being too hot or cold, or the bath water being too hot or cold. Now, social triggers can include being around other people who stress or bother the person. That could mean that somebody in the room is talking too loud, or they were taken by surprise that somebody came up behind them. Now, as we look at those environmental triggers, that is what's going on in the world around them. So environmental triggers come from what's happening around the person and can cause stress. And then those personal triggers, that single internal trigger. Personal triggers come from inside the person. Thoughts, emotions, or activities can cause these behaviors. And we're going to dig into each of these in a little bit more depth. But first, let's talk about those non-medical approaches. So non-medical approaches to dementia-related behaviors are going to vary for each person that is living with the disease, based on their likes, their dislikes, their abilities, their preferences, their viewpoints. The approach ultimately should focus on giving physical and emotional comfort. So ultimately, use what you know about the person to find that comforting activity. But as you'll see in the 4-step approach, we don't want to redirect the individual without addressing those emotional needs. think for a second, you're sitting on the couch and you've had a really hard day. Maybe you're crying and your spouse walks in and sees that you're upset and is like, you know what? I think you should go for a walk. Maybe that'll help. You might feel kind of put off, like they didn't want to hear what was going on. They didn't want to meet that emotional need. So we need to make sure that we're doing the same thing for our loved ones, where we're meeting those emotional needs before we redirect. So let's dig into that 4-step approach, and then we'll read over some vignettes and apply that to real life as well. So you'll see here, these 4 steps are listed in the handout that I gave you today on the 2nd page. And it goes into a little bit more detail on what each of them is. We're going to dive into them today as well. So number 1, detect and connect. Number 2, take care of physical needs. Number 3, help with emotional needs. And number 4, reassess and plan for next time. So let's look at number 1. When we look at detecting and connecting, the easiest way to think of this first approach is the idea of joining their reality. And like I said, that might be more difficult sometimes than others. You might have to put on that detective cap and really think, what is going on at the surface level underneath this behavior? And by joining their reality, the hope is we can uncover what that emotional or physical need may be. Additionally, it's important to approach the individual in a calm and respectful manner. That really shows a nonverbal form of communication that you're here to support the individual. They're safe with you. Now, as we continue to explore that detect and connect, you can use those who, what, where, when, how questions. So you can pause and think to yourself for a moment, who was there when the behavior took place? What happened just before or just after the behavior? When does the behavior typically happen? Does it happen at a certain part of the day? Could it be due to sundowning happening in the later afternoon? Where did the behavior begin? And how did I react? Now, by asking yourself these questions, it allows you to think of the behavior in a different way. It allows you to explore those beginning parts of the behavior and what might have been that possible trigger. Was it an external trigger? Did it seem like it was an internal trigger? Is there a certain person when they come to visit that we see these behaviors more often? It allows you to dig a little bit deeper to help you in joining their reality. Next is taking a look at physical needs. When we talk about looking at physical needs, it's important to know that individuals, for example, if somebody is wandering, they actually might be trying to move away from the pain because that is their response to the physical need that they are having. So always start by looking to see if there's any physical needs, whether that's pain, discomfort, new medications that were recently began, or even a medication interaction that's happening. Explore what we're looking at. Is there a skin infection? Is the individual uncomfortable? Did they have a recent fall that could be having physical needs not being met now? So really exploring that physical aspect to make sure that your loved one is not in pain, because if your loved one is struggling with communication, they may not be able to let you know that they're feeling feverish, or that they have the chills, or that their ankle still really hurts from the fall that they took last month. They may not be able to communicate that with you, which means we have to explore that in a little bit more depth. Now, when we dive into looking at those emotional needs, you'll see that bullet number 3 says redirect their energy into a more relaxing activity. Now, we want to make sure that we're doing step 1 and 2 and the first and second approach before we redirect, because we don't want the individual to feel that they are not supported. So when we think about emotional needs, you can think about how the individual might be feeling in this situation. You can ask yourself, what emotion is this person experiencing? For example, if you're struggling with bathing your loved one and they maybe yell at you during bathing time, maybe that's them letting you know that they feel out of control, or maybe that they hate that this is what it's come to, and they can't necessarily express that to you. You can offer comfort by letting them know that you're safe, you're here together, you're gonna hold their hand and walk them through this journey. And know that the individual may not respond right away, and that's okay. Sometimes as caregivers and as professionals in this role, we have to slow ourselves down to meet their needs and meet them exactly where they are. And then finally, we're gonna reassess, we're gonna review and plan for next time. Because ultimately, there's a good chance that this behavior might come up again. So think back to how we handled the behavior, those possible triggers that could have happened. Explore the behavior in a little bit more depth by joining their reality, and ask yourself some of these questions. Were there any warning signs for the behavior? Did you notice that anything was a little bit off before it happened? You can also think, what responses worked well coming from me, and what responses might not have worked well? You can think about, when do I need to respond next time? And ask yourself, do I think my approach worked? If not, what can I try next time that might change my approach? And then finally, who else can help? Maybe you're spending the afternoon with a loved one and their regular caregiver isn't present that day. And you don't think you handled the situation the best way that you could have, but maybe their primary caregiver has some tips and tools to share with you. So ultimately, it's important to lean on your support system as well. Make sure that you're having conversations with others who interact with your loved one, the individual that is living with the disease, so that everyone's on the same page, and ultimately, they might know some other likes or dislikes or preferences or viewpoints. They might have something new to share that could help overall for the individual. Now, let's talk about some real life examples. So for these next couple slides, I'm gonna read a short story, a little vignette, and then we're gonna have some options and some answer or some questions, and you're gonna help me pick the right ones, and we'll move through all 4 of these together. So let's start with anxiety and agitation. So some situations that might cause anxiety and agitation, you see here on the screen. Moving to a new residence, such as a nursing home. I hear some yeses for that one, right? Changes in the environment, travel, hospitalization, even vacations. Changes in caregiver arrangements. Believing that something in their immediate surroundings is a threat. Or feeling afraid or tired from trying to make sense of the world around them. So let's read this vignette together. Eugene is living with dementia. He lives in a quiet apartment with his daughter, Denise. Eugene spends most days in the living room doing jigsaw puzzles. Denise's sister and her young children are visiting from out of town. The kids are noisy and running around the apartment, and Eugene looks anxious and does not want to come out of his room. So let's take a look at these together. How could Denise detect and connect with Eugene? Could she try to see the situation from Eugene's perspective? What do we think of that one? Yeah? Could she think about when Eugene's behavior started?
Yes.
Yeah? Could she consider if having young, noisy children in the apartment is making Eugene anxious? Yeah. And could she get angry and assume that he's just being difficult? Yeah. All right, so we're gonna click on 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
She might, absolutely. And ultimately, when we look at these, we're all human, right? We all make mistakes. We all get frustrated. It's a normal human response. So as caregivers, self-compassion is one of the most important things that you can instill into your daily caregiving journey to ensure that you know if you make a mistake, it's okay, because mistakes happen. But we ourselves can even reassess and plan for next time for our own personal behaviors or communication within our caregiving role. All right, so we got that one right. Let's move into our next one, aggression and anger. So situations that can lead to aggression are the ones you see here. Physical discomfort, environmental factors, and poor communication. Now there might be some others that fall under that umbrella, right? But let's read this vignette and see what we're thinking. So Sonia is living with Alzheimer's. She lives with her son Hector, who hired a home care aide to help with Sonia's needs. Recently, Sonia has been yelling at the aide during bath time. Hector recalls that the aide telling him last week that Sonia fell while getting out of the bathtub. So let's think about this one. How can Hector take care of her physical needs first? So we're just looking at that second approach now. Should Hector check for any injuries from the recent fall? Yeah. Should Hector talk to Sonia's doctor and ask the doctor to check for an injury? Yeah. And should he hire a different aide to help with Sonia?
No,
Maybe. That might be the case. Absolutely. It's different for every scenario. Great job. Now for our next one, we're going to talk about suspicions and delusions. Now when we look at suspicions and delusions, these can be difficult to navigate. Because as humans, we tend to gravitate towards the logical side of life, right? And the suspicions and delusions may seem like they're not coming from a logical place, which can make it difficult sometimes to approach it in a calm and loving manner. So some situations that can lead to suspicion would be the individual's wallet being empty or in a place that they don't think that they put it. The individual may forget that they moved an item from one place to another. Or if the caregiver is moving things while cleaning, they may believe that those belongings are now gone. So for our vignette this time, let's read about Clara. Clara is 85 years old and living with Alzheimer's disease. She is living with her daughter Irene. Recently, Clara has been nervously walking around the house. She looks out of all the windows in the afternoon and she will often tell Irene, "Those people are out there again. They came in here last night and took my purse." Irene tells Clara that no one has broken in. However, Clara keeps walking around the house and is becoming even more upset. Now for this one, we're specifically looking at those emotional needs. So that third step, okay? So how can we help? Should Irene distract Clara by asking her to set the table? Okay, I've got some mixed responses on that one, and let me tell you, when I was going through this program myself, because this is a new program, I clicked number 1 because I thought, oh, well, redirecting is great, right? But we've got to make sure we're meeting those emotional needs before we redirect. So imagine my shock when I clicked number 1 and I got it wrong, and I was like, oh, wow, I really have to reevaluate that myself as well. It can be so easy to just go straight to redirecting because sometimes that detective work takes a lot of time. And you might not feel like you have the time to play detective and figure out the emotion behind it. But that right there really shows the importance of meeting those emotional needs and then redirecting. So number 2, Irene can reassure Clara that she is safe and offer to check all the doors in the house are locked. Yeah. And Irene can listen carefully to Clara's accusations and say that she is taking the problem too seriously. Yeah. See, and that was my thought as well on this. I think that there's different verbiage that Clara or that Irene could use to help Clara. What do you think she could have said instead? Instead of taking the problem too seriously. Is there another way she could have approached that?
She appreciates her concerns and she appreciates her vigilance.
Perfect. That is a great way to navigate it. I don't think that the verbiage was correct on this one because to her, this problem is serious. So by meeting those emotional needs, we have to show that we're here to support them. So with reluctance, I'm going to click 2 and 3 on this one so we don't get a red X on here.
Oh, that was the way
It was, yeah. So let's move into our last one of getting lost or wandering. So again, some situations that may lead to this behavior would be having physical discomfort or restlessness, feeling bored, or unmet needs, such as using the toilet or being hungry. So, Mai Ling is 69 years old and living with Alzheimer's disease. She lives with her son Kenji and his wife and their 2 young children. Mai Ling ran her own flower shop before she retired. Kenji starts to notice that Mai Ling walks back and forth when she's in the yard and seems anxious. Once, she tried to leave the yard when the family was outside with her, and she tried to go to the neighbor's garden. So let's take a look at this one. So we're looking at the 4th step this time, the review and plan for next time. Number 1, stay connected with Mai Ling while spending time outside. Support her with simple activities to reduce boredom. Yes or no? Yeah? Okay. Number 2, avoid taking Mai Ling outside to spend more time in the yard. No. Number 3, make the yard more attractive to Mai Ling's interests. Plant flowers she likes or decorate with items that might be found in the garden. Absolutely. And tell the neighbor that Mai Ling is interested in the garden due to her former career. Make sure that they have the family's telephone number so they can call if they find her in their garden. Yes. Now, I really like number 3 on here, the idea of making the yard more attractive. And the reason why I like that is often when we see a wandering behavior, it can be helpful to think of it as a goal-directed behavior. So that individual is trying to get something to meet that unmet need in some way, shape, or form. So if we think of that as being goal-directed, we can see how number 3 could be so beneficial for Mai Ling. Because she might feel as though she wants to go out and pick those flowers and make a beautiful arrangement for her family members. That might be the goal behind her pacing in the backyard. So we'll submit this one. And we're going to hear a video.
While caregiving for my dad, I realized that one of the behaviors that he had related to his dementia was wandering. He would often feel restless and want to leave the house, sometimes at 5 in the morning, sometimes at 8 o'clock at night, or just at any point throughout the day. And at first I was very frustrated by this behavior and just would constantly tell him, Dad, you can't go out right now. We're not going out right now. But I realized over time that that was not working. And rather than telling my dad what he couldn't do, I had to put things into place, telling him what he could do, offering him a structured schedule, activities that were not overstimulating, and a schedule that really promoted him feeling calm and engaged throughout the day. Once I started doing this, it really helped to reduce the wandering.
All right. So moving on into our next one, we're going to talk about the medical approaches to dementia-related behavior. Now, we talked about those non-medical approaches, and when we look at these medical approaches, one of the key things to remember is that most dementia-related behaviors are a result of the disease progression. However, it's important to know that some behaviors can be triggered by critical medical needs or a treatable condition. So you'll see up here that some behaviors are triggered by those, and that can include drug side effects, whether it's a new medication or an interaction between 2 medications, discomfort from infections or other conditions, stems back to the idea of, was there a recent fall? Could there be a possible skin infection going on? Is the individual uncomfortable in their seated position? And uncorrected hearing or vision problems. If these problems remain uncorrected, that could lead to the individual withdrawing even more and lead them to feeling lonely or just alone in general. So when we think about medication, the first place to start is with your doctor, your loved one's doctor, and being sure that you have the opportunity to share with them. Now, if your doctor doesn't put your loved one in one room and you in the other room, a way that you can have this conversation with your doctor would be writing down on a notepad what you're seeing at home and either giving it to the nurse or to the doctor so that you don't have to share that in front of your loved one. We don't want to talk about them like they're not right here, right? We want to respect their dignity. So that can be a great way to mitigate that and ensure that you're still able to tell the doctor fully what you're seeing at home. Now, there are some medications that could potentially help, and these medications help lower or control many symptoms, specifically delusions and hallucinations. However, these drugs also have a higher risk of causing stroke or death in older adults. So people must take them very carefully. Often these medications are to be taken at the exact same time every day as well, which can be difficult to add another task to your plate as a caregiver. So explore if this is the right step for you and your loved one, and just talk to your doctor more and be sure to share your concerns about them as well. Now, this is the take-home activity. However, I'm happy to dive into it with you today. That is a part of your workbook that you have there. For those of us that are listening online today, I am happy to share that via email with ACAP so that they can send that out to you as well. Now, when do we know when additional help is needed? Obviously, we are aware that caregiving is a journey, and it's difficult to do, especially by yourself. So it can be difficult to think about this question. It can be hard to think that you might not be able to do everything for your loved one. However, this falls back into that self-compassion bucket, right? We also have to think about our needs, whether they're physical needs, emotional needs, and we also have to review that for us. So when we think about additional help, behaviors can be stressful. They can be more severe and happen more often as the disease progresses, which can make it hard to continue to respond in a calm, person-centered way. But some examples that you see up here that you know you might need to find outside help include if it's becoming too much for your emotional and physical health, right? Emotional and physical, those are one and one right there. And number two, if you're worried that you, your loved one, or anyone else in the home may no longer be safe. These are important questions to keep in your head as a caregiver. Now, I do want to end here with a note about gun safety, and we will open it up for Q&A after I touch on the incredible resources that the Alzheimer's Association shares. So this is a really important topic to talk about, specifically because of some of the behaviors that we might see. It's important to know that if there are firearms in the home, dementia-related behaviors such as suspicion, delusions, or aggression can quickly become dangerous. To prevent accidents from happening, caregivers should seriously consider removing firearms from the house. If the safety of the person living with Alzheimer's, a caregiver, or another individual in the house is at risk, and you have to call 911, be sure that you tell the police or the first responders before they arrive that somebody in the house is living with a type of dementia. It's a very important note to make. Now let's dive into the incredible resources that we have here at the association. Now my favorite one is this 800 phone number up here. That phone number is 24/7, 365, available in 200 plus languages and answered by master level care clinicians. And they can do a little bit of everything. So if you have general questions like, what financial and legal documents should I have in order? You can reach out for those general questions. If you are a caregiver and you're walking a difficult journey right now and need some additional emotional support, you can reach out for that as well. Now, if you are in a crisis situation and you think to yourself when you're looking at this is not appropriate for the ER, and this is not appropriate for 911, but it's 2 a.m. and I don't want to wake up my daughter by calling her, who can I call? You can reach out to them for crisis de-escalation tips, tools, and resources to mitigate what you're dealing with right now, but also to reassess and plan for next time with them. Additionally, if you are in need of a support group or if you would like to join us for more educational programs, you can reach out to the helpline phone number and they will let you know what programs are near to you if you are willing to share your zip code with them. Now, some local resources you'll see here. One of the great ones is Community Resource Finder. I really like Community Resource Finder because it allows you to explore those support groups and programs, but it also allows you to explore local community providers. So for the professionals in this room, if you'd like to learn more about adding your resource to that, please feel free to let me know and I can help you walk through that. Now, one here that I would love to point out and bring attention to is ALZ Navigator. Now, I know that sometimes in the diagnostic process, individuals are diagnosed and they say, okay, we'll see you in 6 months for a reassessment, right? And a lot of families are left like, what do I do? What is next? Where do I find the information I need to make me the best caregiver for my loved one? So ALZ Navigator is a beautiful resource because it allows each caregiver to build an action plan based on their personal scenario. So how do I approach that conversation about driving? We've got the tips for that. What questions should I be asking my loved one's doctor? We've got information about that. So if you are in need of creating that action plan, that is a phenomenal resource to tap into so that you kind of have an idea, okay, what's next? What can I do next? So I'd love to open the floor to any questions right now, but before I do, thank you to each of you for going through this program with me today and learning with me today. This program has a lot of great information to share, and I know it was a lot to take in, but our main goal after every program is to know that each person in this room has been empowered with new information in their journey. So that is the goal. As long as everyone's walking out of here with one new piece of information, we have met that goal. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I'm happy to take any questions. How about in the chat? Do we have any there? No? Okay. Well, I'm happy to stay for a couple minutes if anyone has any one-on-one questions that you don't feel comfortable asking, and we can go from there, but we've got one in the back here.
I just wanted to ask, is sleeping more hours during the day a sign of progression, or is it even a part of dementia or Alzheimer's?
I am not sure about the amount of sleeping. Cheryl, do you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, any kind of, thank you for welcoming me up here.
Absolutely,
We work
yeah.
together with the Alzheimer's Association. Any kind of change, a significant change, is something we want to look at. So somebody who is suddenly sleeping or is starting to sleep more and more and more, we want to know why. And you're right. It could be depression. It could be some problems with nutrition. It could be another illness. It could be a sign of a dementia-related disease. So yeah, when you see something that's different for that person, it's a good time to check it out with your doctor.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have some on that. I was thinking too when you say that the amount of sleeping, you need to pay attention to when they are sleeping and they are not sleeping. Like my mother, for instance, she sleeps during the day. At night, she doesn't sleep that much. She sleeps during the day. So it's kind of like a flip-flop.
I don't mean to take this away from
No.
Alexandra. Would you be okay if I answer?
Absolutely.
So that's another thing you see, typically with Alzheimer's disease and some other dementias, you may see just change in the schedule of a person, and sleep is one of those. So flipping that sleep schedule often happens with Alzheimer's patients. We can't flip them back either. We can try, but typically that just would change.
It could be beneficial too to try to add some easy activities throughout the day for mom to do, you know, whether it's folding towels or finding all of the lids for the different Tupperware containers, whatever it might be. We all know we have that one Tupperware drawer that we just choose not to look at, right? So that can be a great way to add some activities to her day where she might feel as though she's doing things around the house and helping out. You might have to go back and refold the towels to your personal liking, but mom doesn't have to know that, right? So adding activities throughout the day to help stimulate the individual and help to get them to do more throughout the day might help put off this sleeping a little bit more, which hopefully will then mean they're sleeping a little more at night, which might alleviate some of the pressure on you as a caregiver to feel like you have to be on the clock at night, right? Yeah.
I have a comment. I used to, hear or think that, Alzheimer's and dementia, they were used interchangeably.
Yeah.
But Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. That's correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And typically when I start programs, I do start with what is the difference between them because we hear them used so interchangeably. So when we look at dementia, the term dementia is a collective term for a group of symptoms that affects a lot more than just memory. It affects executive functioning, judgment, communication, behaviors. There's a lot of different moving parts to that. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. It accounts for roughly 60 to 80% of all cases of dementia. And with that type of statistic, it's easy to see why we hear those terms used interchangeably. But a great way to think of a term like dementia is similar to like a term such as cancer, where if somebody says I have cancer, that means different prognosis, different medications, different outcomes, different doctors, all of that. The same is true for dementia. So thank you so much for pointing that out. Yeah.
And if we could go back to the question about sleeping patterns.
Yeah.
How much of that do you feel is related or have something to do with their previous occupation? If someone, work third shift or something, their internal clock is accustomed to that schedule. And that's something I think we don't always think about, but what was their normal routine? Because that's something that's in their long-term memory that they're gonna default to more so than something new where we're trying to alter their routine that best meets our needs. But again, we have to sometimes make those adjustments to what's familiar for them.
Thank you so much for pointing that out. That exact idea was actually part of our old behavior program before it was revamped. So that's an important aspect to keep in mind too. If somebody was a night nurse their whole life, they might start pacing at 6, 7 p.m. when they used to go to work, right? So that's part of putting on that detective cap, joining their reality and digging a little bit deeper to better understand that behavior. So thank you, amazing point to bring up. Do we have any other questions?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
My sister in Connecticut is early stages of dementia, and all her siblings are not there. Her siblings, but her children are looking after her. So when I did visit with her, she has a habit of, she put a little bit of something and she saves it in the refrigerator. So there's all types of paper plates, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but it's driving her something crazy. So you have any suggestions as to how they can help, how I can help the family deal with that? I mean, I'm not there, so I can't intrude too much.
Yeah. A great way to look at it would be, is having this conversation with mom beneficial? Will it make a difference? If it will make her upset, it might not be worth having the conversation, but what you can do is every time you go to visit, go check the fridge, look through to make sure everything is in date, If anything looks a little old, or if anything's on a paper plate, maybe just go ahead and toss that away for her safety. Because ultimately, safety is number one when we look at that, especially when we're looking at the potential of contaminated food. So if having the conversation would be too difficult on mom, it can be a little bit more challenging to kind of mitigate it, but it could be great to just kind of make it a habit to walk in, check the fridge. You know, you could even do it while you're cooking dinner, so it doesn't look out of place that you're going to the refrigerator.
Yeah, once a week your son does that. But she'll say, what happened to that tea bag? You know, where's my tea bag? Because she likes to put used tea bags in there as well.
Okay.
Because she drinks a lot of tea.
Yeah. Now, is there a way that we could maybe get like a tea brewer or something like that that doesn't use tea bags, or look at a different way for her to still get her daily tea intake, but maybe doesn't involve the tea bags, you know, to see, is there another approach that we could take to this? Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about early onset Alzheimer's? Because I know, you know, a lot of times we think of Alzheimer's as our old person's disease, but you know, we were just talking about, you know, now we're hearing more and more younger people.
Absolutely. Yeah, so what I'll preference this with is when we look at the risk factors for Alzheimer's disease, age is actually the first risk factor. And that leads to a lot of confusion that this is actually typical aging, right? But we know that it's not typical aging. So we're trying to work away from those terms like senile and hardening of the arteries and those types of words, right? But when we look at age, there's also another component to take into consideration where individuals that are diagnosed before the age of 65 are determined to have either early onset Alzheimer's or younger onset Alzheimer's. Those terms are used interchangeably. Now, statistically speaking, I'm not sure if it's becoming more common or if the disease is simply more talked about and more well known. When we look at the realistic nature of research in this disease, we see that we're pretty far behind. You know, I've heard my colleagues share that where we are with understanding dementia and dementia research as a whole is where we were with cancer research in the 80s. We have a long way to go. So I think that there was a lack of conversation and a lack of awareness surrounding this disease as well. But Cheryl, do you have anything more to add about the statistical nature of early or younger onset?
Well, I agree with what you just said. But we do know, or we do suspect, that some of the ways that we're living today have an impact on the health of our brain. And so, for example, we know that air pollution seems to have an impact on the health of our brain. Unhealthy eating, not getting enough sleep, not exercising enough may have an impact on the risk for Alzheimer's. And so some of the younger ages that we're seeing Alzheimer's may just be we're discovering it faster, we know more about it, or it may be that in fact, in some cases, people are developing Alzheimer's earlier because of lifestyle or what we call healthy living habits that are impaired, that are not, we're not living our lives in as healthy a way as we can.
Great point.
We're not moving out of center city where there's air pollution perhaps, but we're gonna know there's a risk there that's been documented. So yes, we're probably seeing some more because we're at greater risk.
Great point. Did you have your hand up? No? Okay.
You mentioned younger onset. Are there any statistics that show if you do have early onset, and I have a friend that was diagnosed at age 55, but it was a fast progression. He only lived about a year after. Is there any statistics showing that the earlier you're diagnosed, the quicker the progression is?
Not that
So personally, I have not read research on that. However, you are definitely not the first person to mention seeing the timeline be a little quicker for those living with younger or early onset. Personally, before I dig deep into the question, I would love to dig deep into the research so that I know I'm backing myself up with evidence-based and scientific research.
Just curiosity.
Yeah, I have heard that from many, many people in the community. Yes.
And to go along with that, I know there's been a lot of research about new medications that
Yes.
are out. There's 2 now that have been approved. Any feedback or comments on your research or just what your thoughts are about that?
Absolutely. You know, as we progress through our research and as we begin to enter this era of new treatment, it's a really exciting time, you know, because if we look back at the medications that were utilized, Aricept, Namenda, Donepezil, Exelon, Razidine, all of those only looked at the symptoms of the disease. So these new medications are exciting because they slow the progression of the disease. However, they are still not a cure. It still does not reverse any of the damage in the brain. And what these medications actually do is in the brain, when somebody is living with the disease, we see that they have a buildup of plaques and tangles. Now, the scientific term for those plaques and tangles is beta amyloid proteins and tau neurofibrillary proteins. Now, what these medications do is they are given intravenously, and they actually go directly into the brain to break down those beta amyloid buildups in the brain. So we're not quite there yet for multiple cures for all types of dementia, but we're on the right track. So it's a really exciting time for dementia research, and I always half-heartedly joke that one day we'll find a cure and you don't need me here educating anymore, and that's the ultimate goal. I know we are coming up on time. I will absolutely take your question, but to be respectful, if anyone has to scoot out, I absolutely understand. Go ahead.
What was the treatment you were just talking about?
So there's 2 different ones. There's Leqembi, also known as lecanemab, and there's donanemab. This came out last week. It's also known as Kisumli.
That's it. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to pronounce it.
Yeah, I've only had a week to get the pronunciation down, so excuse me on that one. But you can find more on our website, alz.org, if you want to explore those in a little bit more depth.
Excuse
Yeah.
me.
No, you're fine. I absolutely
Very nice.
understand. Thank you for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you for coming today. We do have some extra workbooks left over, so if anyone wants an extra to bring back to a family member, please feel free to snag it from the table on your way out. Thank you all.
Thank you so much to Alexandra. She has given us so much to think about. And as she said, if you have more questions, keep asking them. She's available. Thank you also to our sponsor for today, the Age Code. Give me 1 minute to tell you about what's coming up. Our next program is on August 15th. Again, lunch at 11:30, program at 12. RSVP if you'd like to be here for lunch so that we order enough food for you. Next, in August, what we're going to hear about is how to deal with the needs and care of someone after they are hospitalized. We'll learn about what the medical instructions mean. Get bunches of prescriptions and instructions. What do they mean? How can you provide physical and emotional care to your loved one? And who in the community can support you in that journey? If you'd like to be notified about our upcoming program, please like us on our Facebook page. And again, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. Bye.